た一匹のヒーロー Occult Disney 上のごとく下もまたシンデリー Occult Disney ショーをお楽しみください
Welcome to the Occult Disney podcast, where we're currently traveling around in Japan trying to remember each other's names.
And drinking each other's spit.
Yeah, drinking each other's spit. I mean, it's kind of disgusting, but it could be worse, you know? The level of embarrassment seems, especially because it's like a tradition, and we'll get to... I mean, it's their tradition. It's not like a normal one, I think.
It's a plot point. It's an important plot point.
It's an important plot point. So, yes, this is English title is Your Name. We are finishing up Anime Annuary. This is Matt here. That's my name.
That's your name. And your name.
Yeah, the way in Japanese to ask it would be like, Name wa desu ka? I think Kimi no Nawa is more like thinking to yourself, like, what is their name, you know? Which makes sense in the context of the movie.
There's a who's on first joke in here that we won't put you through, but just know that it's in there somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Paranoid American over here. That's my name. We already got your name, so that's my name.
Names are out. Okay, there we go. This spent 3 or 4 years as the highest grossing domestic film in Japan, like ever. So unlike Summer Wars, which was kind of like this cool indie thing, this actually is the blockbuster movie of 2016. I think it played some in America. I mean, it was probably more of a curio in the States, but
it went way under my radar for sure.
Right. But this is you couldn't avoid this in 2016 in Japan. And I didn't see it till 2017 or 2018. I did not see it in the theater because it was in Japanese with no English subtitles, which is not appealing, especially for a movie like this where you kind of need to know what they're saying sometimes.
For the last, 20 years, would you say this movie would find its way on like top 10 lists for like best movies out of the last 20 years that have been released?
Maybe. The thing in Japan is success is ephemeral sometimes. There are some standbys. We talked about Ampamon, who all the kids love. There was a kid on the train just a few days ago screaming out Ampamon. Draimon, those stay forever. The Pokemon has definitely, gotten its tender hooks into Japan. But some things that are super popular kind of fade away. The movie that knocked this off of the number one slot for anime was Kimetsu no Yaiba, which in America is Demon Slayer, I believe. So that blew this movie out of the water. It made just, tons of money. And 2 years later, everyone's past it. You don't see that much about that IP anymore. I know one kid that I think still wears T-shirts from it, but yeah, there's some things that are just massively popular in Japan. Also around 2015, 2016, there was a Yokai Watch, which was kind of we've talked about that a little bit before. That's kind of a Pokemon thing. And I went through this almost as a joke, but also because I actually do like it. When I would travel, I just always I still have one, the Yokai Watch keychain from wherever I am. This is from a wasabi farm. So it's the ghost cat is holding wasabi. And then, by 2018, they just didn't sell them anywhere. I went somewhere a few months ago, one of the hot springs I usually go to, and they had like a little outlet thing. And they had a snowboarding Yokai Watch keychain for like $1. So I was like super excited and bought it. It was the first one I bought in 5 years or more.
So how did your name show up on our list, say over the Wasabi Farm movie? I know that's not what it's called, but I already forgot it.
Oh, no, there's no Yokai Watch where he goes to a wasabi farm. It's just you're at the wasabi farm. They stick the IP with
Yokai Watch. So how did your name show up higher on our list than the Watch movie and the Demon Slayer movie?
One is I think there's like more weird mysticism in this movie that is definitely interesting for this podcast to break down. And just to be clear, it's a lot of it I think is vaguely based on, especially Shinto ideas, but isn't like a specific thing. Like the weird things about this particular family and this temple is like maybe specific to them, which isn't the case in Japan. Like there are regional traditions that are not, normal, which I think this one falls into. A lot of it, I think, is kind of like made up too. I'm not 100% sure. And also location. Summer Wars was straight up set in Ueda. This movie is set in Gifu Prefecture, which is one prefecture over. But the location, since Itomori, the town in this movie, is not a real place. So it's based on like the Tokyo settings are all 100% photoreal. The ones in Itomori are based on places in Gifu and Nagano. Like Nagano has Suwa City, which is, you could call it two small cities or one medium-sized city around a giant lake. So Itomori is very clearly based off of that. Suwa is much bigger. So they have bookstores and cafes and a few tall buildings. But yeah.
I think that's where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles come from too, Suwa City.
Yep. No, now you're thinking of was it DOS FX where they would do all their rapping and spell Suwa? Right. I got real confused with that a few years ago. I ran across a DOS FX
straight from the Suwa.
Yeah, SEWA and well, Suwa's SUWA, but yeah, I'm sitting there like, what? Yeah, and of course it's got like a manhole cover, so I should have worked it out, But
this movie also amazing DOS FX reference just out of left field. This movie also has the exact quote, "Would you just give it a rest with all this occult nonsense?" That's an actual line that somebody says early on in the movie. So I figured it was a pretty good match.
Did you do this one in English? This one I don't, basically when there's not a bunch of kids speaking, it's like watching English if you want, that's fine.
Yeah, I did it in English. I'm glad that I have your blessing for doing so.
Yeah, no, I don't give you the blessing when it has kids speaking because kid actors doing anime in English that just annoys the crap out of me and makes movies bad,
So far, I think I've done one. I've done one in the original language, that was Summer Wars because I didn't really have any other options.
Right. This one, I watched it. I've never seen it in English, to be honest. I watched it last night again in Japanese, but yeah, when my parents visited a few years ago, I put this on for them when we, in their hotel room because we were driving around the countryside and going through places that look just like this. I was like, oh, it might be cool to watch this,
I will say that this movie, more than any that I've noticed so far, you do miss a little bit with the English translation because there's a few different points when someone's reading a message on a phone or they're reading something that was written on their arm or in a notebook, because that's how these two characters end up communicating with each other. And the versions that I all found, they didn't have that part translated. They had the audio translated, but there's a lot that kind of explains these major milestones in the story that I kind of had to just glean for myself based on the reactions afterwards. But I'm sure that if you actually knew how to read the characters, you probably would have gotten a lot more out of the story.
Well, I'm going to jump right to the end of the movie here. So if someone's listening cold, this is one thing you might have missed then. When they do meet in the Twilight Zone or whatever, he writes a message he writes on her arm, but she doesn't have a chance to write on his arm, right?
Right. Yeah, she gets like one stroke and then all of a sudden she disappears.
Right, because Twilight is over. But later when she does read her arm, he has not written his name. He just wrote, "I love you." So she told her to know his name.
Oh, God.
So yeah, that's, since you mentioned it, that's kind of an important plot point. Some of the other stuff, I mean, like what they're writing on the phone, there's a lot of like kind of comedy stuff in there, like stop messing with my social arrangements or things like that.
Yeah, because she's like getting him to go on dates and stuff, but like she's also wanting to go. It's a little bit weird, but also that final part too, where they're like in that twilight and she just kind of like pops out of existence. I was just wondering, did she die there? Is that her dying, or that's just Twilight ending?
That's just Twilight ending. Again, and I don't know what the English translation does, but they make it very clear. I forget Kumori. I don't remember what the Japanese was for Twilight, but they're very clear, like it's this moment. So,
they do. They mention how it's called the magic hour, or the golden hour, or Twilight, or two lights. They have all these different phrases for it. But I guess it wasn't clear until you just spelled it out just now that was the time in which this weird soul transference was happening.
Right. So when she disappears, she wakes up back in her body in the cave 3 years prior, is what I was reading it as. which is confusing to any listener if they didn't watch the movie. So I guess this is one you should definitely watch it.
Well,
it's
I
good.
guess
It's a good
I guess
movie.
we can give we can give a full spoiler synopsis. And I think this one's a little bit less complicated than Summer Wars was, because Summer Wars just had so many characters that were playing into this. This one's essentially 2 people, maybe 3 if you count Grandma, along with a whole bunch of secondary. But it's like it's the 2-man group, but it's actually a guy and a girl. The girl is living in a city that already exists because of a meteor hit it in like prehistoric times, you assume. And we find out, this is the big spoiler, but you find out that she and her entire city is about to get taken out again by another comet that's basically going to hit the Earth. Comet turned meteor, right? That's how that works.
What did they name it in the English version?
Maybe I don't.
Okay, here's another translation thing, because it would have hit you square in the face if you gotten in Japanese, where it's Comet Tiamat.
Yeah, you still have to keep explaining.
Do you know? Tiamat is one of the names for the Anunnaki planet that makes a 3,000 year orbit around the solar system.
So there's actually an Anunnaki reference in here that I completely missed because of the translation.
Yeah, so the comet, obviously it's not a planet like in the Anunnaki story, but Tiamat's kind of a loaded term. There's a few other names for it too, but yeah, that's one of the biggies. So that hit me square in the face. Like, at least somebody was thinking about it.
So the plot is essentially that this girl, she's going to get taken out. However, through some sort of a mystical connection, like a quantum connection, like a quantum entanglement that she's got with another guy that lives 3 years in the future in Tokyo, where they weren't affected, and it shows itself in that he'll wake up, but she'll be kind of driving his body, and then vice versa. She'll wake up, but it's actually him in the body, and you always know that it's him in the body because he plays with his boobs first. And then he goes out and has a day. And over enough time, they realize almost at the exact same moment, or it's edited like that, they're like, oh my God, these aren't just dreams. I'm actually living in somebody else's body. So this is when they start keeping diaries of exactly what's going on. And they both have phones because they're only separated by 3 years. And this seems like it takes place within the last 10 years or so.
And they do have dates saying 2013 and 2016, I think, on screen at a few moments. I noticed a lot of details because I've seen this movie like 4 or 5 times.
So they figure out how to convey messages to each other using their phones and using notebooks and writing on their arms. And through this, they start to kind of hone in, although there's this weird dynamic that as soon as they wake up in their actual bodies, they can't remember the other person's name. It only lasts for like a split second, which is kind of annoying that he just writes "I love you" on her arm. Like, that didn't give any sort of help. Like, if he would have just wrote his name, then I guess it ruins the whole premise of the movie. The whole name of the movie, Your Name, if you're like, why the hell is it called that? Is that the very last moment of the movie, at least in the English version, as they are like finding each other finally in the future, they're like, oh, by the way, what's your name? And that kind of like ends it. But I guess the climax of the whole story is really that she dies, and all of the people in this town essentially die in like normal history. But because they realize there's this weird quantum entanglement, like rift in the time-space continuum, that they can somewhat affect the past. So the guy in the future drinks her spit. Well, I'll get into that, I'm sure. The guy in the future drinks her spit that he finds 3 years after she's dead, drinks it, can talk to her directly in this Twilight Zone, and through that is able to let her know that this comet, this meteor, is going to end up hitting and taking everyone out. So when she wakes back up in the past, she can alert the entire city. They set off a bomb, they destroy the local infrastructure, and then they take over the emergency warning system, and then just have everyone evacuate to a safe spot. And in this case, instead of, I think they say like a third of the town dies, there's like 1,500 people living in this area. Instead of 500 dying, they don't really mention a body count, but it's like so small that everyone was like, oh my God, thank God that this advance notice. And they even mentioned the word conspiracy, I think, because people are now suspicious of the government. How did the government know this ahead of time? But really, it was these two people, and then it turns into a love story, because I just assume almost every anime usually has to have like a weird contrived love story, so they end up falling in love with each other through, spread between 3 years and location, not knowing each other, just living in each other's bodies. So I guess they kind of, there was no surprise once they both got naked too.
Oh, right. No, but yeah, the end of the movie, Japanese audiences just bawl in tears, right? I guess it scratches the
Really?
Japanese itch in particular. Oh, yeah. That staircase at the end is, I don't know if it's still, it probably still has a lot of people coming and taking photos there because it's photorealistic.
Because of this movie?
Because of this movie, yeah. Otherwise, it's just a staircase that nobody would care about.
I could detect that this was a moment. It's like, oh, this is the cry moment, because they're both crying. And then they like embrace, and then the camera does like a slow pan up into the sky, and then it shows the name of the movie again at the very end. So I guess I understood the cue, but maybe it's weirder for me to feel as emotional with the art style as it is. I don't know if that's limiting me, but I think that it's there. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, these two cartoon characters fell in love with each other. How cute.
There is, works better, I guess, most princess movies where Prince Charming has no personality whatsoever and Snow White barely has much more of one.
But even though I don't think I've ever really cried over a human in any Disney movie, just Dumbo and maybe Pinocchio, but definitely Dumbo.
Right. I didn't even know there's like a live action, I'm doing the quotation sign, live action Snow White coming out in like a month or two, which again, it's like, okay, whatever, why? Maybe I assume they'll try and give her more personality in there and it will be annoying. But that's me being blackpilled on live action Disney movies, I guess.
Oh, I mean, yeah. She'll be a girl boss. There's enough said.
Which, time and place, that's great. But just why don't want to make it in the first place? You don't need to remake Snow White, I guess is the baseline.
Well, and that's the one, right? Snow White is the real Fantasia in some ways. That was the real first foray into this feature-length animation. And it's also by far, in retrospect, out of all the movies we reviewed, it still feels like that is the most occult, or it's very easily in the top 3 of the most occult movies, based on like literally her skin and the way that she's interacting with these sort of underground gnome creatures. And so yeah, it would be hard to not absolutely screw it up because of how well I think the original was done.
Right. And hey, prove me wrong with the new one, but by this point, it's like fool me 15 times and I won't get fooled again,
Bush Jr., yeah.
I will. Are you familiar? Probably not, but the idea of people being connected by a red cord. That
I actually, maybe not in the context that you're describing it, but this is also a popular trope that was in the old Sherlock Holmes novels. They would call it a scarlet thread. And I think it was kind of like a link to blood in a way. In this movie, it's kind of the same, although they show an umbilical cord at a certain point. And I feel that like there's a cord, like a little string that they tie around their hair, around their wrist. But when he's like basically like traveling through time and space into this twilight zone where he can talk to her, it shows that red thing turning into an umbilical cord at some point. So yeah, I totally got the symbolism on that.
Yeah. Okay. But actually in Japan, it's more of like a romantically connected couple is the idea.
Oh, it's like like all like throughout Japan, you just know like, if there's a red cord.
You and the one are connected by a red cord is the idea. There's a movie from 2002. Takeshi Kitano directed it, who is, and one of the notable directors of the 90s and 2000s, I would say. Comedian in Japan, weirdly enough, but he's more known as like a filmmaker in the States. But yeah, he made a movie in 2002 called Dawes, in which a young man who rejects his engagement to his fiancée to marry the daughter of his company's president, when his former fiancée attempts suicide and ends up in a semi-catatonic state, he takes her out of the hospital and they run away. And then they're like, I think he is leading her around with a red cord or something. Like,
okay, it's like Weekend at Bernie's, but a little creepier.
Way creepier. Yeah. Isn't he zombified in Weekend at Bernie's too? Doesn't he get dialogue in that one?
I mean, I think he's legitimately dead in that movie.
Yeah, I think they go zombie in the second one. So, it's been like a while since I watched Weekend at Bernie's.
Oh, that's right. No, he gets some kind of voodoo curse or something. And then he gets animated through magic. That's right. And he does like dancing and stuff.
Yeah, because the actor is like, I don't want to just like, do nothing for an entire movie again, At least that's what I assume he was going.
It's remarkable in its own right.
Yeah. One other thing, I don't know. I guess we're moving through the plot. Do we finish the plot? I guess we.
I think so. I skipped over some of like the more minor stuff that we'll get into.
For sure. I was just knowing that one big marketing flaw, I think, for this movie, in that I have not seen Makoto Shinkai. He's the director. I've not seen his follow-up movies because the next movie, I saw the trailers in the theater. And it looked super similar. And then the poster was like almost the same. It's called Weathering with You. It's a world where I guess it just keeps raining. And that doesn't sound that interesting either. So I just never watched it.
Well, I would definitely say that this movie would have sparked more interest if it gave you just the tiniest little idea that it was about time travel or people sharing bodies or something. Like if this had an American PR campaign, the cover would basically make you understand within a fraction of a second of looking at it, like, oh, that dude and that chick are switching bodies. This is Freaky Friday, kind of. And I think that actually would have made me more interested in seeing it at first approach. Because really, I go into pretty much every one of these completely blind. And like this movie is called Your Name, and it's just like a guy looking up into the sky with like a casual like Helvetica font. And that's pretty much the movie cover and the posters and everything and I intentionally didn't go and read the synopsis ahead of time.
Yeah, actually, that's a great one for this one because the first half of the movie seems a little bit, you feel like you're watching kind of a derpy comedy anime. And then, 45 minutes in, it just like turns the key, right? And turns into something else entirely, which is, I think that's a hat trick of this movie. It manages a complete tonal shift, like pretty well. The director, of course, he's a perfectionist, and he kind of is like, I did so many things wrong in this movie. There's so many things I would fix. And, he doesn't personally seem to like this movie a whole lot.
What does he know? What the hell does he know? Seriously.
Yeah. Well, he made the highest grossing film in Japan for like a 4-year record. So it seems like something probably went okay.
Well, and I kind of have seen that as an ongoing theme, not just in this series, but just like overall, that the person that creates the thing, they're too close to it. They're almost always too close to it. And sometimes them like meddling with it just only makes it worse. But we'll never know the difference between the version we get and then the version they meddle with unless you start seeing like director's cuts and stuff. But I mean, there's only a small handful of director's cuts that are far superior to like the main cut. I mean, the Aliens, I can't remember which one of the Alien series where they show the architects, but that one, Prometheus, by far, I mean, that director's cut is like one of the best examples of that. Are there director's cuts of like these anime movies that we see? Is that like a trend that you see in anime?
I think it's more like they'll just remake it completely. Neon Genesis Evangelion. Of course, there's like the 90s version. It's considered a masterpiece for anime fans. Love it. I've actually never watched the whole thing, but in the 2010s, the same director simply made them again with, higher animation technology. So instead of doing a director's cut, he's like, I'll do it again. So India does a lot of that too. Bollywood, they'll just like, okay, let's just remake it 5 years later.
All right, Disney too.
Yeah. So that is a thing. I guess it's getting more to the point of remaking. Let's see if I'm not sure if there's other versions of, say, this one. I don't think so. Home media, television broadcast, box office. It doesn't. Yeah, this doesn't have like a director's cut or anything. I honestly, I'm saying I can't think of one. It might be just the way Japan is, it's less individual focus. So, I mean, Japan for sure has auteurs. I mean, look at Kurosawa, right? But anime it's very much a team effort. So even though there is like, this guy's the director, I guess it's kind of felt like it's still like kind of a company product. So no one could just jump in and be like, I'm making the director's cut as easily. Like culturally, it would be difficult to do that.
This movie is really good in that it's like a cinematic experience. It feels like you see an entire movie, and I have been appreciating that more when we've been watching some of these. Is that the animation style is just another different vehicle to present what's like a really interesting story deep down. And they do it so well. Like some of those scenes that you mentioned are like photorealistic. They look phenomenal. They almost look real, except I mean, obviously it's all illustrated, but it has a completely different quality to it than you might expect from. I mean, if you're anything like me, prior to like a couple years ago, everything just kind of blended in like a Dragon Ball Z kind of style or like a Pokemon TV show kind of style. But this is like so far removed from that. I think all the movies that we've seen so far are so far removed from that level of detail. So it's really the difference between comparing, the same type of feature length animation that you're used to seeing from really good Disney films versus like a Saturday morning cartoon version of those.
Well, this is how Japan made use of all the computer technology. So in the States, we've just been like, everything is 3D CGI now, right? And that's basically been the plot for the past 20 years. Whereas in Japan, they're using a lot of computers to make a movie like Your Name. They're just using it in service of more traditional looking 2D technology. It's just now it's 2D, hand-drawn looking on steroids. Because they're using things like the cap system that Disney was using, things like that. You mentioned Pokemon and Dragon Ball. Yeah, for me also, that was kind of what I thought of being anime style. And I always looked at them and thought, oh, the buildings and the cities and Dragon Ball and stuff, they're so weird and creative. And then I came to Japan, I was like, oh no, that's just what it looks like here. Yeah. There's nothing weird or creative about them at all. Just what a Japanese city looks like. So yeah.
And it is fairly unique too, because so much of anime does take, I mean, obviously is influenced by the architecture in Japan, but it's also like such a much smaller reference area, right? Versus like the entire United States and the difference of all those. So sometimes I think as a limitation, like looking through some of these movies, sometimes they have like the same feel just because they're based on this much smaller geographic region, and the fact that you mentioned that they actually scout some of these locations. They don't just completely make up like, well, this is kind of what a forest looks like, so we'll just draw a forest. Like they'll go and scout a specific forest or a specific city and base it on that. And I assume that over time, like you might see the same location in a few different properties that way.
For sure. The bridge where they pass each other without quite recognizing each other, and where he's trying to contact her by phone. I used to use that bridge when I'd have to go to the head office in Tokyo. That was like on my route. So I've been on that bridge many times. I can recognize it in this animated movie, which I feel like most American anime movies don't do. When we get to Baymax, Big Hero 6, whatever it's called Baymax in Japan. That's why I said that. But yeah, it's like, what is it, Sam from Tokyo in that? So of course it's not a real location. And even, New York City, it's like, just make it look like New York City. They're not, put the Empire State Building in the background, but there's lots of alleys in New York City now because we need them for our animated movie, whereas the city itself doesn't have so many alleys.
Anyways, I mean, the dilapidated, like post-apocalyptic versions of our cities are always much cooler anyways.
Oh, those are lots of fun, of course. And then the train station, that's not based on the train station next to my house, but it looks an awful lot like it. So, I'm watching like the photorealistic locations when you live in Japan. You've been to some of these places and now you're seeing them in like real accurate anime form, which is kind of trippy.
So I was wondering when I was watching this movie too, how accurate some of like the history that kind of comes up is. And I think that this one played it way looser than the Summer Wars, because in Summer Wars, I said,
Summer Wars, they were giving you a history lesson in Summer Wars,
Yeah, and I get it. It set the expectation high. And this one, I did find something somewhat interesting, and they were mentioning that. So one of the subplots of this movie is that the girl Mitsuka, is that her name? Mitsuha. So the girl Mitsuha, she is sort of like in this traditional family, I guess kind of like Summer Wars a little bit. Like the girl was part of this like traditional clan that kept upholding the old traditions in this sort of rural part of town. But she's being trained by her grandma and they do this this very specific ceremony, like a public ceremony, where they create sake made from fermented rice and human spit. So they literally will just take a glob of rice, chew on it, and then spit it back into a special little container, and then cover it, and then just set that aside and let it ferment. And this is a real thing. It's you probably can pronounce it better than I. Kuchi Kamazaki.
Yeah. Hold on. I think you're not actually destroying it too hard. I'm just having a look at. I know the actual words here. Kuchi Kamazaki. Yeah.
Look at that. That was so close. I didn't even say kamikaze. Kuchi Kamazaki, which is a compound word for mouth chewed sake, and basically it uses human saliva as the fermentation agent. And it also means that every version of this tastes a little bit different because everyone's spit tastes a little bit different. But if you ever have this, you are 100% drinking somebody else's spit. And I was able to find a few online articles where people made it themselves by using their own spit and re-drinking it. There's
probably
no
because of this movie.
Well, probably because of this movie. There's no version of this that makes me want it a whole lot. It's almost like in the military, some people would make like blood sausage out of like human blood, not like out of victims, but like their own. And that was also very gross that I would never try. I put this kind of in that same category, although the way that they make it in this movie, it doesn't even seem that it's intended for human consumption. They're doing it to make this offering to a god, and they bring it to like a
it's
temple.
Just an offering in here. I'm not finding much information. It seems it says it's one of the earliest types of Japanese alcoholic drinks, but I mean, I had not heard of this. And the last line here is like, some islands in Okinawa still held Shinto ceremonies involving Kuchi Kamazaki until the 1930s, meaning it's been a while since anyone's, like I said, this is definitely like the small local town with this weird tradition that's just,
this is off menu. This is when you want to like really stump the chef. If you ever go to a really nice place and they're like, go ahead, order off menu, I dare you, order Kuchi Kamazaki and just see what they bring you.
Yeah, this is like going down to Louisiana and getting something that makes the frog legs seem perfectly normal, you know? This is, yes, way off the menu. I mean, you will see little, like ceremonies like this. My route home, walking home from work, I walk by a temple, and every couple months, something's going on there at night with people, They're usually playing a boombox with traditional music, and that's what they're doing in there too. Okay, aren't they? Every once in a while they'll have the actual drummers out, which is better. But yeah.
Well, and the plot point in this movie is that the guy, they're connected to each other for a while, and like it happens, they're affecting each other's lives, they're passing these notes back and forth through their phones. But then all of a sudden, contact just stops. They like the dreams kind of stop, and it happens right after her grandmother, who raised her. The boy is in her body. The grandmother looks at what she thinks is her granddaughter and then sees that it's actually the spirit of this boy, or at least they're portrayed that way. But you get the idea that Grammy knows that something is a little bit different. And as soon as that happens, he wakes up in his boy body again in the middle of the night, kind of sweating. And that's the last time that they kind of share this body, until he makes a trek into the ruins of this previous city because it had gotten hit by this meteor. And once he gets there, he finds the shrine, because when she, I think, I'm not sure if it's when she creates it, but when she brings the spit wine to this temple, it's actually the guy in her body. So he knows where it's at and he knows what it is. And the grandma is making this whole sort of speech about union, and about even when you eat food, you're now like creating a union between the food and your body. Like you're now one. It gets very sort of Zen in a way. But he realizes that maybe this is a way that I can reconnect with this girl that we've been swapping spirit and bodies over. So he goes into this little shrine and he finds her spit and he drinks the spit. And that's what allows them to reconnect. And he essentially gives her this important information, and then she gets everyone to safety. So I did think that, I don't know if we're going to ever watch another movie, Disney or not, where the plot point is such a specific one. And I kind of liked how it played out. Like I was like, why are they showing me? I knew that just like Chekhov's gun, if they show you the gun in the first act, you know it's gonna have to go off in like the last act. I was like, I know they're showing me this spit wine for a reason. There's not a non-reason for this to be happening.
Yeah, for sure. I also I recently rewatched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, so it's kind of interesting with this in parallel, watching the metaphysically, or well, I guess it's metaphysically driven obsessions. You know, in Close Encounters, he's got to make the mountain out of the potatoes, then he's got to make it out of his house, even when his wife leaves him. He's got to go into the military closed area, and I guess Taki-kun is not quite as like that hardcore about it, but he's pretty obsessed. He's dragging his friends out to the countryside for no particular reason, or what seems like no particular reason.
They kind of get some of the insight too, though. He talks about the girl that has been like sharing this body with. So I mean, at least you know he's open with them, and they don't think he's absolutely crazy for all of that.
I guess that's the difference in Close Encounters. He couldn't explain it to anyone if he wanted to, because he doesn't know what it is.
This movie also reminded me a tiny little bit of, there was a series called The Three Body Problem. And this is where these strangers from all across the world were somehow connected to each other because of like a meteorite or something that they saw at night, some sort of like astronomical anomaly, and that they shared this in common and were able to kind of like jump into each other's bodies. I have to greatly oversimplify it because it was like a full-on series, but it made me feel that could have easily been inspired by this movie first.
Possibly. I was also thinking though, the body switching in this movie, one, it's Granny mentions that it's a family thing, like, you know, her mom before dying had these switches. Granny, when she was young, had these switches. It sounds like
I either missed that entirely or it wasn't included in the translation.
That might not be included, but yeah, she makes it clear that it's not Comet Tiamat that's causing this. This is like this family's weird metaphysical condition that this happens. As far as Taki, I'm not quite sure why he's the recipient on the other end. They don't make that clear, but maybe that has something to do with the comment. I don't know.
So that was, I guess, in a general sense, there's a number of these movies that are kind of like this. I can't remember every single one off the top of my head. I mentioned like Freaky Friday is one of like the go-to examples. There's also I think there was one with like Tom Hanks or something, and they have like
big, like it's big, right? He becomes big.
Big he doesn't transfer. There was another one too where it's like a kid and his dad, and there's like a skull, and they both say like, "I wish you knew it was like," and they switch bodies. But in all of these movies, there's this moment when, and I realize it's for the audience's sake, but there's this moment when they're walking around like everything's normal, and then all of a sudden they just notice that they've got boobs, or they look in a mirror and they notice like, oh my God, I'm 4 feet tall instead of 6 feet tall all of a sudden. Don't you think you would like feel the difference? I would just assume everyone has their own various kind of like aches and pains, or just like weird ways that your body doesn't move similar to other people's. You would almost wake up and just be like, oh my God, I'm on fire. And you'd have to sort of like slowly acclimate to whatever the particular sort of, like inconveniences are of each person's body. But this movie kind of plays into that trope where, again, like the guy notices he's got boobs and then she notices that she's got junk, right? Like that's the go-to in a lot of these movies, especially if there's like a gender swap.
The other trope this month, which I guess is just the importance of Granny, because everything but Perfect Blue. I mean, it was a nanny in Totoro, but in the English version that you watched, it was Granny. So all these wise knowing grannies. I mean, that's why he knows it's not Mitsuha in there, because she had this experience as a teenager too. So she's like, I know this. You're not Mitsuha.
The Granny too is it's a very convenient shortcut to make something feel traditional, right? Because then you can use that
for sure.
Like the grandmother. It is kind of specific because in American movies, grandma could pass down tradition, but it's not as much of a shortcut as like in Japan. If you got the old grandma that still lives in the old country and she still is like practicing the old ways, even in this movie, they emphasize that, where the rest of the people are just like, I can't believe that, they still do this. How embarrassing or whatever, when they're doing this like traditional thing that only they do out of the entire village that they're living in. So yeah,
my
it's a very
wife's grandmother was
convenient one.
rocking that. I didn't see her much because she died relatively like after I had been together for a couple of years. So I didn't see much of Granny, but definitely that seemed to be what was happening out here with my wife's family. Like that was Granny's role, and she had one or two things that I guess even my mother-in-law, as she's taking on the Granny role, it has a few things that she does up at the family house.
Everyone should have a Japanese grandma to pass on some tradition for you.
Right. And my daughter knows traditions that I certainly don't know. Like she's getting a few things, in the back of her head that I guess when she gets older, will then make her the wise old granny or whatever.
Right? Yeah, your ship has sailed. You're never going to get to be the wise old granny, unfortunately.
I'm never going to get to be the wise old granny. I guess Oji-san, the old man, is usually seen as a little bit derpier. So, or he's just working out in the field,
The reason that I brought up the history lesson of Summer Wars here is because they mention about a fire that swept through this village. This is what I was getting to. Like the whole traditional thing is that part of that tradition is that a lot of it had been wiped out because of this great fire. So I was going to look like what area was this particular movie based on. You said it was kind of amalgamation between a couple different ones. And there was only really one Great Fire of Japan that I found, although it was interesting enough to bring up. And I'm going to butcher the name of this one too, but the Great Fire of Mayagoro. And apparently it was about this temple priest that was going to burn a kimono, but the kimono had been cursed by its 3 previous owners, which were all girls, which all of them died before they got old enough to wear the kimono. So this kimono was apparently cursed. A priest goes to burn this kimono to like get rid of the curse, I assume. And I guess he does this either during a hurricane or right as he's burning the kimono. Hurricane force winds kind of take over. And this had been after a long dry spell. A long story short, it burnt down like massive amounts of the previous version of Tokyo, causing a need to like completely rebuild. And I think this was like the late 1600s or something. But I just thought that was interesting that like Tokyo completely burnt down in a great fire because someone tried to burn a cursed kimono. I've never even heard that before.
Well, then we firebombed the place. They had to rebuild it all again.
Well, it was one time. It was one time we did that.
Right.
Man, they'll never forget that, will they?
Well, they didn't last year. Godzilla -1, if you watch that movie, is very much about that and does it great. I mean, if you haven't seen Godzilla -1, I would highly recommend that. But yeah, it's Tokyo is completely destroyed and they're just starting to rebuild. And here comes Godzilla.
I mean, we could always do Kaiju February. It's right there.
Yeah. But fires are now a great fire like that might be a singular instant, but things burn down in Japan all the time. Think about it, all the temples are wooden, right? So
right. Well, yeah, the article I was reading made a point that at this moment, everything was made out of wood and paper. Like literally all the buildings were wood and paper. There was really nothing else holding the town together. And I guess that the roads and the pathways were also incredibly narrow because everything was so close together. So it was almost a miracle that this hadn't happened many, many times over prior to that. But it goes into, I guess, future municipality planning of spreading things out just a touch more for this exact reason.
Right. But I mean, often you'll go to a temple or something and it's old, but the actual structure is not that old because it's been rebuilt several times, like sometimes on purpose. It's like, it's getting old. Let's rebuild it to specifications.
I don't know if we can handle it here, man. We would have just arsons just making TikToks, burning down temples left and right if it were here.
Oh God. Yeah. I'm feeling some arson. I want to go burn a countryside temple. I can probably get away with that,
Oh, and you'll probably get like 10,000 followers out of it.
Yeah. What is it? The dude in the Suicide Forest, right?
Well, and he ended up beating up Mike Tyson. Weird enough.
Yeah, and then riding around on his shoulders, was it? Anyway, whatever. Another thing that kind of made this movie, I guess, a big hit is the impetus of the movie was the 2011 quake, especially the tsunami hitting Fukushima, right? And that being on everyone's minds in Japan, but I guess this was kind of a national airing of that in a way without having to directly confront it. So I think that contributed to its popularity.
It's got like a natural disaster sort of. Okay, this is another really interesting thing that I found too. That the lake that I guess this is based on, you said it's Suwa, right? Suwa City, where the distro came from. But this lake Suwa is known, and stop me if you know more about this, but it's known as a site of a natural phenomenon called God's Crossing. And apparently when the entire lake freezes over, it gets these huge cracks, but the cracks make, I guess, like a perfect intersection with each other. I guess I didn't get this full part of it, but these cracks in this river that happens at this place called God's Crossing, and this only place on the planet apparently that we know that this has been happening. It's also the oldest known human observed climate record on the planet out of any history of any peoples. So the actual location of this Lake Suwa seems to be really, really specific.
Yeah. Actually, you're telling me a bit more than I knew already, but that actually dovetails in because I often see on the morning news, they'll have a report from Suwa where they're kind of checking how frozen the lake is right now. So, I guess looking for that phenomenon or whatever, like, oh, it's just starting to freeze over.
That's one of the oldest Japanese traditions there actually is talking about how frozen that lake is.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know I was watching that older tradition when they do this on NHK in the morning. So, I learned a bit from that. No, when I go to Suwa, what am I in Suwa for? You can ride around on the swan boat. That's kind of fun. There's several good museums around there. Last time
it's also the birthplace of Epson. So anyone that's been frustrated with their printer, this is where that came from.
And the town just north of that is Matsumoto, which, if anyone is into Evangelion, I believe that becomes the capital of Japan in Evangelion. It's like New Tokyo or whatever. But that's a show. People are way into that. Right now, McDonald's in Japan has the Evangelion burger, so that's their current promotion.
Okay, so we're talking pretty big then.
Yeah. The rates McDonald's promotions in Japan is my main point. But yeah, but I was here when we had the 2011 quake. Have I ever recounted my experiences on this podcast?
No. I mean, go. Let's get the highlights.
Okay, well, when the quake hit, I was teaching a class on the 6th floor, and one student who was a ballet dancer, so I had a very attractive earthquake buddy. I kept giving like homework for the first minute, and then it was just like shaking so much. Okay, then I started holding the whiteboard to the wall because it wasn't bolted down at the bottom, so just flopping up and down off the wall. And it's a 6th floor on a Japanese building, so it is swaying like mad. It was at least as exciting as the earthquake attraction Universal used to have. And that's
it's supposed to sway. You actually want it to sway. That's
right. But when you're in the building on the 6th floor and it's swaying like mad, you can actually see the ground coming a little closer and going a little farther away. It's like a little wild. And I remember, there's aftershock. So walking down the street and there's a little aftershock, and I remember looking at like a bike area just like shaking it, and looked like a special effect almost, didn't it? I think we only lost power for 2 days. I was in Maebashi, which is not that close to the epicenter. It's kind of wild we got shook so hard because it was that far away. I remember right after the quake, I was like, wow, I hope the epicenter of that was close, and it was not. So it was a massive earthquake. And yeah, we were out of power for maybe 2 days. Some food, it was hard to find certain kinds of food. I think you couldn't find yogurt for a few weeks or something if you wanted yogurt. But we went back to work in 3 days, and because of the nuclear power plant, I remember the manager, we went back to work for a day and then had a few more days off because society was still having issues. But yeah, she was like, here, wrap this towel around your head, because apparently that's we were just getting whapped directly by Fukushima radiation that evening.
Well, thank God towels fix all of that.
And if anyone's curious, I have had a bout of lymphoma, and I blame it on that. Doing fine now, but I think that might be a connection. If I got blasted in the face by Fukushima radiation, I had to deal with that a few years later,
Yeah, hopefully there's a love story in the making here where someone's gonna like undo that. They'll send each other messages and be like, "Hey, you might want to actually shut down."
I had a properly weird experience, right? But the whole idea here is just these towns getting completely wiped away on the shore of Fukushima from the tsunami, and there are signs, ain't like several 100-year-old signs that were up on the hills near those towns saying do not build below this point. You know, people from 200 or 300 years ago had a similar tsunami. It's like, look folks, if you go beneath this, you might get wiped out.
I mean, but beachfront property is beachfront property.
That's true. Yeah. But yeah, the before and after those towns and watching on the live news was pretty insane. The point being, it was a very major event that was still in the back of everyone's minds. And, 2016 when this movie came out, for sure.
It doesn't mean just by coincidence, but yeah, the last movie, Summer Wars, and this movie both revolve around these huge meteors coming and basically wiping out an entire city in Japan. And small families doing everything they can to prevent that somehow.
But it's an interesting contrast of Summer Wars happening before the quake and then this movie happening after the quake. So this one seems to be a lot more like emotional, where the Summer War ones is it's not quite goofy, but it's more like let's pull up our roll up our sleeves and deal with it, right? Where in this one you can't deal with it except through this crazy time travel, metaphysical construct.
And you mentioned this a little bit earlier too, how this movie goes through a whole tonal shift where it starts out kind of silly, goofy, then it turns into a straight up Freaky Friday sci-fi sort of movie, and then it turns into kind of like a mystery / love story, and then it you get a nice happy ending at the end that makes you cry. Essentially, it gets a lot more serious as it goes on. But I think that there's also some like telltale signs and like the cheesy campy part of it, like on the first half of this movie, where at least in the English dub they just straight out kind of like beat you over the head with what's happening, because like a whole bunch of things are going to happen. First, you don't really know, like, are they switching bodies? Are they just acting weird? And they both basically jump into the air and they're like, oh my God, we are switching bodies. Like they say it like in English at the same time. They make it very, very obvious. And then I really like, though, that they immediately go into laying out the ground rules. It's like, okay, now that we know what's going on, we know that the trigger is sleep, but we don't know what the cause is. And then they start putting like actual rules in their diaries. It's basically says don't interfere with each other's sort of like relationships, to write out daily reports on the phones, and then regardless to just like keep doing things. And like one of the examples is the guy starts realizing that he has to take up more shifts at work because the girl is like using his body to eat sweets and like spend money on stuff that she doesn't have access to 3 years ago in this urban area. I thought that was kind of like a fun part. And then she makes a good point that, well, she's the one that's doing the extra shifts, even if he's signing up for them, because she's the one that's like inhabiting his body as like they do all of this. And then I guess likewise, he's just groping himself. Like that's what she wants him to stop doing.
Yeah, I guess otherwise, well, he's not doing his hair right either, apparently. So
like she cuts her hair. I guess that was one of the weirdest parts of the movie. Is that?
Well, no, I'm thinking about I think she cuts her hair. I'm talking about when he first is in her body, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you came to school and your hair was a mess, and you didn't have a ribbon and stuff, right?"
yeah, it was like a big deal, definitely.
Oh, my daughter is very obsessed with her hair, so
the cutting the hair kind of threw me for a loop. I wasn't sure what that was supposed to signify. So like, exactly halfway through this movie and right around the point where they realize what's going on with each other, and right before the meteor actually hits and wipes everyone out, she just cuts her hair like dramatically short to where every single person she knows comments on it. And it's almost like, what's wrong with her? Why would you cut off that much hair? And I wasn't really sure exactly what prompted that. Like, was there something that I missed that would explain why she decided to just cut all of her hair off?
She's 16.
Okay. So no, yeah. So just whatever.
I mean, honestly, I'm content with She's 16. You mentioning in English where they're like, we're changing bodies and saying it together. And I'm like, yeah, that would sound, maybe the reason it works a little better in Japanese, because it does happen that way in Japanese as well. But Japanese advertisements usually end with either a 2-second jingle, like Yamada Denki, the electronics store, they're going to have their commercial, and then it just ends with Yamada Denki. And like every commercial ends with that, or multiple people shouting a slogan. So okay, I think the Japanese version is perfectly reasonable because it sounds like the end of a commercial, and it is kind of the end of that segment of the movie. So in Japanese terms, it just kind of puts a pin in that part of the movie. We're moving on to the next part of the movie now.
All right, there was another thing that completely took me off guard. I hope that you can't explain this because otherwise I'm going to have questions. But there's a scene in particular where the girl is in the guy's body in the future, and his job is basically a server at a restaurant, and he goes to serve this table, and at the table there's two guys there, and one of them takes like a toothpick out and he sticks it in his pizza, and he's basically like, hey, comp my meal, I found this toothpick in my pizza, I could have gotten sick, I could have gotten hurt from this. And the girl in the guy's body is kind of like, I don't think we serve toothpicks here. And then he's like, how dare you, such insolence, go get your manager. And they end up comping his meal, even though everyone knows that he's just like making this up to get free food. But at the tail end of that, as the manager comes over and is like, okay, we'll comp your meal, sir, I'm so sorry. He takes out a freaking razor blade and like he like lengthens it out. And you don't necessarily see exactly what happens until later that day. They notice that the girl that ended up helping him, someone like cut her skirt or something. What the hell was that? Was just a random psychopath subplot that gets unresolved? There's just a rogue guy going around like slicing people with a razor blade in restaurants and then leaving. Like I almost feel like I missed why that scene was even in this movie.
Pretty much, yeah. People do run around here. Yeah, they do that. I mean, they do it in the States too. Here's the difference. It makes the national news in Japan. A few months ago, someone was arrested. It was on the headlines about a guy who had been slashing skirts on trains. Like,
really?
It's like he'd slash like 14 women's skirts, and then the cameras figured out who he was. Just here last week, actually, I didn't personally because I was 2 cities over, but Nagano City had just at the bus station, some 46-year-old guy just started stabbing people. One guy was killed, one guy was seriously injured, and one woman was minorly injured. Well, and then the next day,
Stabbing, yeah. I understand, especially if you've got like a full break. But I guess this specific crime of covertly slicing somebody's skirt and like not making a deal out of it, not breaking skin, like they're not harming the person, they're just cutting the skirt. And it's not even like a sexual thing, I don't think, because it's not like it's not like he's cutting the skirt off or anything, just cutting the skirt. And when you just mentioned that, there was a guy that got caught doing like a serial skirt slasher, like what the I guess I'm struggling to understand the mentality behind that. Stabbing, I get. Like slicing someone and hurting them with the razor blade, I get all of that, but this was a very calculated move. And I guess the explanation, if it makes the news there, maybe it had been in the news enough that it became like a plot point in this movie, or like, oh, that asshole's one of those guys, one of those skirt slashers. I've just never considered the role of a skirt slasher in society up until this movie.
I mean, I don't understand why you would be doing that, but yeah.
Well, I did say that I was hoping that you wouldn't be able to explain this, right?
Well, you see, when you slash a skirt, you gotta say all creepy like if you give the explanation. I'm actually saying here, look, the internet is not being my. Here we go. Up. Okay.
Is there? I would love to know if there is a specific Japanese word for this skirt slashing. That would make my day. Like if it's not just skirt slashing in 2 different words.
Okay, here I will give you headlines from Japan today. Over 20 man arrested for cutting schoolgirl's skirt on train, October 4th, 2014. 50-year-old man did it. 20-year-old man arrested for cutting high school girl's skirt at train. Is he a chef? Why is he walking? This is 2020. 18. Oh, this one's okay. Here, 18-year-old girl's buttocks slashed with knife on Tokyo cruise ship 2012. So that one sounds like blood was involved. That doesn't sound. Serial foot licker apprehended in Kyoto 2016.
Oh, don't ever change Japan.
I gotta look at that one. Serial foot licker. Approximately midnight on July 23rd, a woman in her 20s was walking past a parking lot in Fushimi Ward, Kyoto City, when a man sitting inside his car called out to her, "Could you help me fix my brakes?" She climbed to the driver's seat, began pumping the brake pedal. However, the man suddenly climbed into the driver's seat floor, removed the woman's sandals, and began licking the soles of her feet. An act that would go on for the next 30 minutes. Perhaps in shock at what just happened out of fear that the man may have a weapon. The woman did not fight back. Okay. She did start recording it with her smartphone then. And then the man said thank you and let her go after 30 minutes of licking her feet.
She put this on TikTok, but this is happening in his car, in his driver's seat.
Yeah.
I feel like there's way more to that story than we're getting from the synopsis, but okay.
That could be very
I
true.
think we have found somebody that would maybe drink spit sake. That guy would probably be game for that, especially if it was someone that he just licked their feet.
The other one, police have arrested a 50-year-old man on suspicion of cutting a schoolgirl's skirt on a train at JR Minami Urawa Station in Saitama Prefecture. The company employee was waiting on the platform at 7:55 a.m. Train stopped. Miyashita got on, slashed a 15-year-old girl's skirt with a cutter knife, and then got off just before the train doors closed.
Wow.
A policeman on patrol noticed Miyashita repeatedly doing this as trains came in and grabbed him. There have been at least 20 similar. There have been at least 20 similar incidents on trains in Saitama Prefecture since last November. So this guy has been doing it for months.
In this movie, this beat for beat, this is what happens. It's just not in a train; it's in a restaurant. But he takes out a little little razor blade. He clicks it up. He slices this girl's skirt, and no one even realizes it until I guess they're all like cleaning up, and the guy's gone.
So it's in there because it's a regular occurrence that's in the news. So they just put it in the movie, just I guess to make Tokyo seem a little weirder than Itomori, where everything is kind of like pastoral like.
Yeah, I've learned something new. This is a new form of Tokyo nostalgia. Like, I remember when they used to just cut 15-year-old girls.
Used to? Like I said, I thought I was going to see one from like a few weeks ago when I did the search. None of them were for a few weeks ago, but I did find like 10 of these. So it's at least the most recent, I think, was 2020. But no, sorry. Oh, no, that's 2024. And that one's actually sad. I don't want to read it on there. Okay. But yeah, there are a lot of these. So it's apparently a somewhat common occurrence. I've never lived in Tokyo, and also I'm not a woman. So they do have trains just for women in Tokyo, especially the Yamanote line, which is the one that circles Tokyo. The last train is women only. So
that they don't get their skirts cut, apparently, because it's like an actual thing.
Well, I mean, even more common is just getting groped on the train, because think about how crowded the train is in this movie, which that's how crowded trains are in Tokyo. I'm lucky. I usually just get to sit back and chill on my train. It's never that crowded, or rarely that crowded. So I usually, get a seat, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I'm in my own little compartment area. I mean, it's not like its own room, but it's like 2 seats.
Again, you're never going to get the full Japan experience, because I don't think anyone's ever going to grope you on a train.
Right. I don't think. No, I'm not going to get groped on a train, probably. But our trains are not crowded enough to grope easily, unless it's like maybe Friday or Saturday night after party times, and you got a bunch of drunks on the train. Hey, then I might get groped. I mean,
I like that there's a sliding scale that, like, as you're riding the train, you're like, this is a gropeable amount of people right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking I could get groped on a nighttime train, right? Because they're drunk, they don't care.
Well, and the main would you call it an actress, or the main girl in this movie? She doesn't get groped on a train, but she does get groped by her twin spirit body guy constantly, even to the point where the first time that they meet, she kind of yells at him for it.
I guess that kind of makes sense. My sister, tattling. Although I guess sister didn't know she was doing that because she thought she was talking to the same person about it.
And he couldn't even remember her name after all of that. That did feel like a pretty huge plot gap to me, that, like, aren't they writing their names and the messages back and forth? And then the second that this Twilight Zone connection kind of ends abruptly, they just completely start forgetting everything about the other person to the point where now they're just wondering if it was always a dream all along.
This might be another translation thing. In the when they first go with Granny makes it clear when you cross this threshold to go into the underworld, you have to give up the thing most important to you. So the insinuation when they go into Twilight time is that they have to give up knowledge of who each other are, is how I read it.
Okay, no, that was definitely not something that stood out in the English translation. The biggest one in that translation is as Granny is bringing them to this where this temple's at. The translation version, they refer to it as the netherworld, and she's like, "Be careful, kids, you know, you're about to enter the netherworld." And then the young girl is just like, "Yay, netherworld," and just like jumps into it.
Yeah, so it's called Underworld. The temple is referred to as the body of their god, as in the town's god. The body is this little temple. And yeah, she says, she doesn't say be careful. She just says, when we cross this, you will be giving up the most important thing to you. The first time it is the sake. And I think the second time it is the knowledge of each other, because when they're doing each other's diaries, remember when this happens, all the messages from the diary like just magically disappear from his phone.
Right. Well, they glitch out. Like as the guy's looking at his phone as they've been messaging, he's seeing the actual letters like start changing around, like Matrix style. They're like basically phasing out of existence until all the messages are gone. And then after all the messages are gone, now he starts questioning whether they ever existed to begin with.
Right. So before that, they do know each other's names, because she's like, "Taki-kun, what are you doing?" When she does, you know, screws off to Tokyo for the day, she is like, "Where is Taki-kun?" So she does know the name at that time and has to give up knowledge of it for re-entering the underworld is the insinuation. So actually, yeah, that's a real, I mean, that is a hard to translate plot point, especially, I mean, it's a cultural and a language thing to deal with, kind of. You know, the idea like this is the body of the god and it's on this mountain, you know, a few miles away from town.
Speaking of that too, right when the grandma's talking about the body of the god, where they go and they bring the spit wine as like an offering, and she's describing how cords and ropes all represent time, and how time can fray, and it can like twist and tangle, and it can become undone and then redone. And she says that's like the god showing us through these ropes. And I was just like, any god, or is she talking about like the god of the city? Is this a different god that's like the god of ropes and of time? It wasn't clear to me which god is in charge of cords and time.
I think she's talking about like the god of time, because she says Musubi is time. So
okay, so like a Japanese Chronos or something.
Yeah, I think that's what she's getting at. Again, everything has its own god, so you know, time has a god as well, which I guess would interact with your local god or whatever. Again, this is like real deep Shinto stuff. Like this isn't even like Buddhist stuff. This is, you know, 1,000-year-old stuff that's just baked into Japan, right?
Right. Well, I guess I would be the most annoying Shinto apprentice ever, but it's like, is there a god of time, of like the morning and the afternoon and of night? Is there a god of midnight? Is there a god of 11:59 p.m.? Are there like, how much can you split up these Shinto beliefs and say that there's a god for everything?
Because they're going to send you to the Zen Buddhist temple. They're sending you to the Zen Buddhist temple where you don't have to think about Shinto.
Okay.
Watch. Well, it's a sliding scale, though. It's not like one religion is Shinto, one religion is Buddhism. It's all the same thing, but depending on where you go, it might be a little more. I find
that actually sounds even more complicated.
Well, here's the real short version. When you go to a temple in Japan, if it's like mostly just like natural looking wood, it's more on the Buddhist side, Zen Buddhist side. If you're looking at a bunch of red, you know, painted stuff, it's more Shinto, and often it's a mix of the two. So you'll find a little of both.
Is one of them going to win eventually, you think?
No, they're supposed to coexist. They're at odds. It's and not anymore. It's like McDonald's and Burger King, except neither of them are really that interested in profit in that case, so they don't have to compete.
I'm
But
sure
you-
McDonald's wants to stomp out Burger King.
Yeah, I'm trying to take out the corporate aspect of it where they need to make money, and also just very few people in Japan are, religious. Everybody goes to the shrine at New Year. If you have a big exam coming up, maybe you're going to go to a shrine and get a fortune or whatever. Maybe occasionally you end up at a ceremony of some kind, but people it's not like they go to the temple every week or something like that.
Right. But I mean, if you at any point in your life bring an offering to a shrine of any kind, to me, that's religious. Like, you're now religious.
Well, no, like right now, my family has set up a couple of dolls because Hinamatsuri is March 3rd, which is Girls' Day. And you're supposed to set up these dolls, and it's kind of a Shino-based thing, but you kind of set up the dolls, you put an offering in front of the dolls, and you leave it there. And then just before the holiday, you take it down. It's considered bad luck to leave it up for the actual holiday. So right now we got
this tradition takes over religion, essentially.
Yeah, there's no religion here. In fact, I'm having like a little sciatic nerve back problem. I moved the table from the bathroom and put the shrine on it. So I was like, I think I kind of need that table still just to lower myself properly. So they put it back, and the shrine is now currently sitting on the dining room table.
Interesting. Well, that's why you got people going around cutting everyone's skirts up. Maybe you need to get back to the real gods.
And then the room next to that's a tatami room. It's got a little family shrine there, which for a long time, I wonder if my parents, I don't know how, this was in my family house, and maybe my parents slipped in when they visited Japan once, but this little Yoda, he was actually just sitting in the shrine for like 3 years. And currently there is a pack of cigarettes on the shrine because unfortunately my wife's great uncle died last year, but he had a few issues, and the first time he was sent to the hospital, they took the cigarettes for him and just stuck it in front of the shrine. So it's like, why are there cigarettes in front of the shrine? That seems weird.
And now it's part of the tradition.
They're still there, I think. Nobody here smokes, so no one's gonna smoke the cigarettes. But yeah. So, but that's the thing; it's like kind of baked into the house. I explained Oban last week for Summer Wars that they do that up here. You also make little creatures out of cucumbers and what else do you use? Cucumbers and radishes. You put pencils in them and make a cow out of a cucumber. Put that on the shrine.
Speaking of meals and stuff in there too, they make a point that they're eating miso for breakfast, and I don't know, is that a real thing? Do you actually eat miso for breakfast too?
Miso soup, miso shiru.
Yeah, miso soup for breakfast though.
Oh, yeah, traditional Japanese breakfast would be miso soup, rice, maybe like a little bit of salmon or something, like grilled salmon. That sounds like a pretty normal Japanese meal for breakfast. Asa gohan.
Where do you get your days full of sugar from then?
Not from breakfast. I mean, a lot of people eat, pastries like a shoe cream or, something. So especially younger people like when I have students, they'll be like, what do you have for breakfast? Like, I had bread. I'm like, be more specific. And usually, it's like a Danish or something. So you get sugar there. I mean, me personally, I mostly intermittent fast and I basically just eat at night, So I find I have more energy by not eating because you eat and then your body's using energy to digest. I'm not giving anyone health advice. I'm just telling you what I do. I haven't been able to eat breakfast like in my life. Like my mom would try to force me, like trick me into eating breakfast in high school and stuff with this protein shakes, milkshakes, or whatever.
Hey, I'm not taking any of that Edward Bernays propaganda. Get it out of here.
That's right. But yeah. So you're talking to a guy who's not going to be a proponent of breakfast to start with. But the traditional thing. So if you stay at the only time I might eat breakfast is when we stay at a Japanese inn, like the traditional kind. And they have a very elaborate breakfast. So you'd be a complete dick if you didn't try and eat it,
This has been Matt's diet advice. Don't eat breakfast, but do eat welcome.
There we go. Okay, that's my advice. Don't eat breakfast, eat welcome. That'll be the party line. Okay.
Just not for breakfast.
Hey, man, I could probably pass a Senate hearing right now. So with my thing, yeah, they'll like me better, I guess. Let's see. What else is it? Oh, things that my family do have from this movie that are now family memes would be I do offer when we pass the happy drink shops, and those exist all over the place where it's like you're in the middle of nowhere and there's like 5 drink machines and a sign that says happy drink shop in katakana. And I'll often reference those as cafes, of course. Of course, they do actually build a table and put out an umbrella, so that makes it a little more cafe-like in this movie. And I will imitate the foodie pictures, especially if my wife is around, where it's like Mitsuha's and Taku's body and doing the foodie photos. So I'll do that. She does
get very excited about going to an actual cafe because she complains early on that all she has are drink machines.
Well, and on Japanese TV, whenever anyone eats something, they'll just be like, "Oh, shit!" and they'll go nuts, like saying it's delicious. Like my wife tells me I'm being sarcastic about this, but I really do think you could probably take acting classes in Tokyo teaching you how to eat food on Japanese TV. They just have these insane reactions to food. Nobody ever eats something. Just, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. Or nobody eats something that says, unless it's a joke, like it's a comedy on a panel show, like they're making them eat whale cum or something. No, they probably have to say that's oishi. It's like something truly like weird for Japanese, even like maybe then they're like, oh, like wasabi filled gyoza or something. They eat that and then they'll go, oh, but usually everything is oishi. So
they did have one particular, it was weird. It was almost like breaking the fourth wall in a way, but that she goes to respond to someone and it turns into an actual advertisement. It looks like a commercial and it has like little branding that pops up and like a little thought bubble and everything. And
Temple Maidens Kamakusaki, yeah.
And it never happens again. It just happens this one time in the movie. And I was almost like, did I dream that or did that actually happen?
No, that actually happened. That is one of the weirder moments in the movie. I like it's just supposed to be your imagination. And yeah, that made me think of Yokai Watch, actually, which I guess was popular at the time. But it's kind of a weird, out of place gag. That might be one of the things, like why the director's like, I think I could have done better. I have issues with this movie, like something like that. I mean, I think it's funny, but I could see where if you were the maker of this movie, you might be, why did I do that? It doesn't fit with anything else in the movie.
Well, I think it was serviceable. I definitely recommend watching it, even if we've spoiled the entire thing for you. It's really hard to spoil just because it's done so well. Like the visuals in this movie are really what tell a large majority of the story.
Right. I had one thing I would. Oh yeah, I'm curious how the music hit you on this one.
Serviceable. I'm not even sure if any of it stood out, except I think that the English dubbed version, it was all English dubbed music. So there were a few times when it was a little cheesy. Like I could tell that whoever was singing alongside like this high pitched, like nasal toned voice, along with like metal guitars and stuff, like kind of like pop version. But they were clearly trying to cram in way more information into the little like verses and the hooks than I think deserve to be in there. And it was like, okay, they're either directly translating the original song or they're just trying to like put too much exposition into some of those lyrics in the very beginning.
I think the songs do put in too much exposition, which actually might be a reason to watch it in Japanese, because then you're not paying attention to that, even because I think it was still subtitling some of the lyrics. I just was like tuning them out, because the first time I saw it, I actually didn't really like the music. I'm not a big J-pop guy.
Well, let me start with that. I think that all of them so far are serviceable. If there's any soundtrack that I actually like and would like to hear again outside of watching the movie, I'll note it. But so far, it's all like I wouldn't listen to any of this music unless it were behind a movie that I was watching.
Right. So, but yeah, the group is Radwimps is the name of the group doing it. The leader of the band actually I think he does the incidental music too, which I do like in this movie. Mm-hmm. But and I now that I've seen it 4 or 5 times, I'm like, whatever, that's the DNA of this movie. I don't mind it anymore. But they were like, just especially in 2016, that group was insanely popular. I think they were highlighted on the the New Year's musical show that year, that sort of thing. So you couldn't get away. I have students, like 8-year-old boys that'll sit there emphatically singing these songs, especially a few years ago. I have one that still does it. I don't know if it's specifically this song, but
I'd love to get their critical opinion on like the original version and the English dubbed version.
Yeah, I actually checked, and this is another one. I think we had the same conversation with maybe Perfect Blue, where I was like, oh, I actually do want to see what the English dub is like, and my versions do not have English dubs. So that's another reason I'm not doing the English. The only one I did an English dub for was Howl's Moving Castle, because in that movie, just Japanese didn't make sense, at all. It was supposed to look like Europe or something. So what are we doing here? I guess the only other thing in my notes I really wanted to point out for translation stuff specifically is the lady that he's dating, like his boss. In Japanese, there's an extra layer of kind of like he keeps calling her senpai, which is basically your work superior. And by that, it's like they've been there longer than you, which is kind of a weird thing in Japan. If they've been there longer than you, they are kind of like your superior in a way.
So in the English version, you could tell when he was being awkward because he would call her like Miss such and such. Like he would address her very formally, which was awkward because like they're on a date, because when the girl jumps into his body, and I guess this was another interesting plot point. I guess she's like either she's a lesbian or she's just very open. She's just very open for anyone that's down to party. Mm-hmm. And she's setting up these dates with his superior at work, his senpai, who's also a very attractive woman, right? But she makes this note that's like, I didn't set these dates up for you. I was setting these dates up for me. And she's bringing her, I think one of them, and this was also hard to tell because they just show up at these locations, or he's like scrolling through all of these possible date ideas on the phone. And I don't know what any of these are, but I assume that they go to get like pampered. They go to like a manicure, pedicure place at some point, and he doesn't know what to do exactly. And it's because, she was legitimately wanting to go on a date with this chick. But then when it switches back and he gets control over his body again, they go on another date, and he's obviously being super awkward about everything. And he keeps calling her like Miss. So it's like separating him and making him look like almost like a child addressing an adult in those cases.
Okay. And so the Japanese, it is, but it's in a work context. Like senpai is specifically my work superior, and we don't have a specific term for that. So, but
you wouldn't address them like that outside on a date outside of like the work context, right?
It's a little bit weird still, but it's a little different than me just calling my date Mrs. Or Miss. Excuse you wouldn't do it Mrs. unless you're committing adultery, I guess. But do you have anything you want to dive into before we wrap this one up today?
I think we got it all in, man. I've learned so much in this one. Spit sake and serial skirt splitters, I guess. There's not a name for that, right? Like that particular practice of cutting girls' skirts with a razor blade. If this were German, there was, of course, be like a unique word for it.
I'm going to do a quick. It's so common in Japan. I'm sitting here wondering if it is a term. We got chicans on the train. That's the general view for people doing like horrible things on the train. So
chicans,
yeah, chicans on the train are the you guys you want to avoid. Wafuku. That's glossary. Nah, I'm just looking at people trying to tell me how to make a kimono here. So
you might want to be careful how much you search this specifically in your area. You don't want to pop up on some sort of a watch list now.
Yeah. But I mean, I've told you about plenty of weird people I see on the trains, even out here in the countryside. So you still get the weirdos here and there.
Right, you watch your skirt out there.
Okay. I do. Yeah, I do have the note. Is he a pervert for drinking that? And then she calls him a pervert for drinking that. So
for drinking her spit. Yeah.
Yeah. Although it was the only way, I guess. So what can you do?
But then she looks down and he's sucking on her toes. And then she's like, okay, yeah, you are a pervert.
Yeah, I hope you didn't have a knife.
But we're going to just let this go on for at least 30 minutes. Let's just see where this goes.
Yeah, I guess the last thing is the community speakers are accurate. You will occasionally get annoying announcements. And the smaller the town, the more likely you're going to get annoying announcements. So, the other thing about the 2011 Quake, where we had a little time off, and I was watching Space Battleship Yamato, which was Star Blazers in the States, and they have their nuclear alarm in the show. And then at the time, there was another aftershock coming. So it was funny. Right after it happens, I hear outside the exact same alarm because there's about to be an aftershock. So that was a weird viewing experience. Just to throw that out. That was just like it's just the sci-fi show and the real alarm's the same thing. That's weird.
It is interesting because there seems to be, from my limited point of view, but there seems to be a weird sort of blending of the line between real life and anime when you get into like that weeboo sort of like Japanese culture where I mean I don't want to go right to body pillows, but let's just go right to body pillows. It's like one of the extreme examples of this, but also just like the people that marry the anime characters, and it feels that the line between reality and not reality, maybe people think the same way about, you know, Americans or Westerners and like Disney princesses or something when like a new Disney movie comes out. But it does seem that the blurring of reality between anime and real life is way more prevalent. Like it's a much larger shade of gray, I guess, when it comes to Japanese and anime.
Yeah, when we did Perfect Blue a few weeks ago, and there's all these like weird guys obsessed with Mima, take that a few steps and you have people obsessed with an anime character. I think it's more often something like Haikyuu, which is about high school volleyball. And so there's like different high school teams with different characters, and the show has like, you know, 20 regular characters, and then people will obsess on like one of those characters like it's a real person. So, and maybe buy a body pillow of them.
If they go again, they get a cartoon razor blade.
Yeah, they get a cartoon razor blade. So depending on what their picadillos are. Anyway, I guess we'll wrap this one up today. If you want to let the good folks know what you're up to.
Yeah, just follow at paranoidamerican.com. I got all kinds of new projects coming out constantly. And go follow me on podcasts. I got a whole bunch of different series. I put them all under Paranoid American Podcast, but in there, I do some of the older episodes of Occult Disney. I've got monthly Mormon Mondays in there. I've got Paranoid Pages. I've got a whole bunch of different sort of topics. So if you're looking for more things to entertain your ear holes, search for Paranoid American wherever you listen to podcasts.
And I'll go for the music pitch today since we were talking a bit of music. You can see my podcastio.org is for podcasting. You check that out. And then rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com for a whole bunch of music I do. The most recent one is like 2 to 4 minute tracks with binaural sound on both sides. It's called Psychic Utopia. So, you know, as I always say, let me brainwash you with that. All right. Cheers, man. Spit sake time.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I screw scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.